Hello and welcome to the third edition of the GPVWC podcast for March. We're two races into the career ladder season, and after our races in Australia and last week in Sepang, and so we're going to have a bit of a talk about the two of them, specifically towards the Super League portion of things. And tonight I'm joined by Nick Rowland and William Ponissi. So good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So we're going to jump straight in Australia. First race of the season, and there was after a pretty hard and long pre-season. I think a lot of us were looking forward to getting things going, especially with between the new mod, the RFE, and all these other little bits and bobs in place. And for Super League, it was a perfect start out of the box for Dave Carr-Smith, who took victory. Well, at the line, it was just from Lucas Euler, but obviously there was circumstances afterwards saw Euler given a 20-second penalty for exceeding track limits, and Ruud Heasterby completed the podium. It was a rather exciting race, Nick, as you were the man calling with Simon Smith.
Yeah, it was. It was a very good race and a great way to kick off the season. From a personal point of view, with Midnight, a lot of people expected us to come in and do very much what we did at the start of last year. I think with the way the upgrades seem to work, though, this season, as we seem to be discovering each day, is that it's specific upgrades, and there's also the gap difference is not quite as high as what we had previously been used to. So Dave and his natural ability, in particular, up against our two lads, and obviously the Nijos as well, seemed to perform exceptionally well, and it caught us out somewhat with what we had there. You know, with unfortunately Lucas having the penalty as well, and Alex for that matter. It's just I don't know. It's hindered our season in a way that didn't happen last year, and I think we've been a little bit caught off guard, to be honest with you. But I think it was very impressive the drive from the Nijo of Ruud Heasterbeek. But the two Torrents, considering how underdeveloped they are, to roll up in fifth and sixth. That must have been the two drives of the day for Australia.
Yeah, I think, I suppose some would be somewhat surprised. I think, obviously, I think a lot of people rate Petter and Jim very highly, and it wouldn't, I suppose, like you said, it was a surprise from the fact of they went into the race with, what was it, the second worst developed car on the grids. But I think a lot of people would have at least expected the pair of them to be at least up there and fighting away for some sort of points. But when you think about obviously how bad the car was then, and obviously we'll go on and talk about Sepang and how things got a little bit better for them. By the end of the season they could very easily be fighting for the title. But as you said, I think a lot of people will probably take a bit of heart that you said, that you guys were caught off guard a little bit. I suppose it's a human element that maybe some people probably thought that Midnight didn't really have after last year.
Yeah, I kind of got that impression as well. But it's true. I'm not too sure how to explain it. Maybe like daisical is one way of putting it, where we just got a little bit complacent in what we've been doing, and I think we didn't really focus on ourselves as much, and we were looking around at other people a little bit too much as well. So the start of this season, I mean, pre-season was was pretty decent for us, but the start of this season has not been as smooth as it was last year, which seems a little bit odd considering we'd come in all guns blazing at the start of last season, and essentially we just want to continue the consistency over into this year. But it's just one thing after another is curtailed into the point where we haven't been able to put in the same operation, if you like it, until what will hopefully be the third. Well, will hopefully be a better race for us in Austria.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were caught off guard, not just yourselves coming into this season. And I'll be the first one to put my hand up. Myself. Well, there are other factors that have gone into it, but I know that I've not had the proper preparation coming into this season. And I think even if you're a little bit off your game, there's one thing about the Super League this year is that you need to be pretty damn focused in what you do, and you need to be able to have the time to actually do it properly. Otherwise, you are literally going to be cut off without any sort of support. You're going to be left adrift at sea, really, for lack of a better term. But Will, obviously, as Norton's manager, it's a great return to form. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen Norton in the winners' enclosure.
Well, to be honest, 2012 was a very, very difficult year for us.
Just a bit.
I don't want to sound, arrogant or so, but you do get used to winning, and you do get used to at least performing at the very top end of the field. And last year that did not happen. We were struggling. We were fighting for some decent results in the end. If you look at the fact that we finished fifth, we were in contention for third place in the constructor championship until the very end of the season, the last race. But if you compare it to the kind of seasons we've had in the past, that was definitely not up to the standard that we sort of came to expect of ourselves. So it feels really good to be back winning, back getting strong results, both from Dave and from Lee. Obviously, Lee has been particularly unlucky in the start of the season. Obviously, was hit at the start in Australia, and suffered the wet weather in Malaysia. Despite it was probably like the fastest guy in dry, at least from the data we've got in practice. So it's good to see that the car is there, the drivers are clicking with it, and really heartening after the difficulty last year.
I suppose, how is relations actually working in that team? Because obviously David gotten off to a stonking start. Lee obviously didn't even make a lap in Australia. I mean, he spun out. He didn't even try to salvage anything out of the race, which is obviously depending on what was up with the car. But looking at the results and looking how some people, especially like how far Lewis came, who was obviously involved in the aftermath of Lee's spin, managed to get himself up to 10th. You would have thought maybe Lee would have at least gotten a few points out of it had he managed to get back to the pits and repaired whatever was wrong with it. And then, of course, as you said, with Sepang, obviously we know that Lee has. No, I know this is going to sound wrong, and I apologise if this offends him, but I suppose confidence can be a bit fragile with Lee, especially if it starts going wrong. And we've seen him when he's talked to the media on both not podcasts even, but on the after each of the races that he's competed in, hasn't been the happiest camper, has looked at other people and everything. So, I mean, how are you as a team manager dealing with all that?
Well, first of all, Lee is an extremely talented driver. He's an exceptional racer. And he's got a tradition of expecting the best from himself. I think he's his own harshest critic, in a sense. He's got very, very high standards for himself. And he, and as you mentioned, when things don't get in the right way for him, he tends to suffer. And I think this is where both Dave as a teammate and I as a team manager really step in and try to reinforce his confidence that he's one of the greatest racers ever to drive into this league. And just a matter of getting back into the zone mentally, because no one doubts his driving ability. Just getting that level of peace and enjoyment in what you do that allows you to get back into the car and put the results that your talent warrants. I think it's just a matter of time. He just needs to one good race in which he manages to express himself like he wants to, and he'll be back to be the Lee we've seen dominate plenty of races in the past. Just a matter of time, and obviously we're working with him and trying our best to make sure it can be back into race-winning ways.
Right. One thing we did actually notice in Australia, and maybe it'll be something we'll have to watch out for in upcoming races, was that a number of people were struggling with keeping the engine life. I know the last few laps in Tom van der Voort blow his engine. I believe Kieran Ryan also had issues with his engine towards the end of the race as well. I knew for myself in practice that because of the nature of the downshifting I was finding with it, I knew it was going to be touch and go whether I was going to survive the race. So I suppose for both of you, I'll go to Nick first and with it because you're both in charge of engine development. Do you think this is going to be something we're going to have to watch out with for these self-developed engines this year, that we're going to need to be very mindful with the gearing on the cars to ensure that they will last a complete race?
I think with the nature of RFE in particular and the way it simulates the temperatures, etc., it's likely that cooling is going to be quite a vital part of it. And it's something we looked at. Obviously, you've got to balance it with the performance that you're actually adding onto the engine as well, because obviously you want to take the maximum away from it, but cool it enough. So there are elements to it that will, at certain races like Malaysia and Australia, they're usually quite warm races. So the nature of the engine and how fast it heats up in particular, or the longevity of the engine, it's going to be difficult because of the amount of cooling that may be required. But again, like I said, it's more of a balance of, do you go for the performance over the engine wear, or do you sacrifice a few tenths to make sure you can get to the end of the race? So it's the balancing act not only of the teams, but of the engine supply to those teams as well. So the communication levels need to be quite high between the teams to understand what exactly they're looking for.
Yes, and Will, do you think that this is going to be kind of the thing that maybe you as an engine supplier might even need to sit down, talk to your team, that those who you supply, and discuss things with them before they start turning around and saying, "Hey, you're supplying us dodgy engines"?
Well, I think one of the key points, one point that Nick was touching on about, is that you need to have knowledge of what your engine allows you to do, and the kind of performance and trade-off between performance and reliability that your engine allows you. The moment you know it, the moment in which you sit with your supply teams, customers, and be very frank about what you can and what you cannot do with your engine. I think it's a positive development to start with. We used to have a lot of focus on reliability in the past, which knowing that your car perhaps could not make it to the end influenced the way you were driving. And in the last few years, because we've had such a big improvement in reliability, it has become basically bulletproof. And perhaps that slipped a bit from our minds. I think this is an important thing to take into consideration. It adds another layer of interest and another layer of strategy in our league.
Well, I suppose at least unlike the old days, it's something that can creep up on people rather than being told beforehand, hey, you got to drive 42 laps and then pull your car over because, hey, it's got to blow up. The good old days.
Yeah, that was definitely not the ideal way, but back then, offline racing, that was the only thing we could do. But I remember, for example, in 2009, you were already around as a driver. I remember having to be really careful as a driver with my boost, the use of the boost, because that would fry the engine if used too much, as I found out in the first race of the season when my engine fired just a couple of laps after my teammate. But there was something that drivers were using, very, very much strategically towards the end of the season. I remember fights that I had with Kieran Ryan and Mark Wicks in Monza, in which basically my use of boost allowed me to basically be very good at defending on the long straights in Monza, and that wrecked, I think, Wicks' race, to which I feel sorry for him years and years after. But it's one extra thing the teams and drivers have to take into consideration. It just takes some getting used to, like we did in the past.
Yeah, and perhaps now as engines get more developed, and obviously we'll get more boost options in, maybe the return to such things of using the engines in such a strategic manner is going to be something we see as the season goes on. We'll finish up with Australia just with Nick, because I know you watched the full race at least. I'm not quite sure if Will got around to the whole thing, and I know I was kind of in a mood after my disconnection. Did anyone really catch your eye, even now, a couple of weeks after the race, that you look at the results, that any particular drive in mind that you thought that was a bit tasty?
Off the back of last season in particular, Rude in the Nijo I thought was an impressive drive, and we've already touched on the fact how well the Torrance did in particular due to their upgrades, and I thought they did quite a strong job. But coming away from Australia, I didn't see a massive difference in comparison to last year. As biased as this may sound, is Alex obviously being his second competitive drive actually, and going straight into fourth place in our car, with battling some troubles as well with damage. I thought Alex did a great job, but with the midfield backwards from other than the two Torrent guys, it was much the same as last season. If anything, I saw more disappointments than I did positives, to be honest, or positive drives, because the candidates we thought would be towards the front of the field were. The midfield was a little bit jumbled up, but it was more the disappointment of some teams and some drivers that I found more so from Australia, as opposed to the strength of the ones going forwards, other than the two Torrent guys.
All right, well, okay, well, we'll before we jump on this, Bank, who kind of disappointed you then? We'll keep this thread going.
Disappointment was the Kernos was one of them, with Steve in particular. I mean, I've always known how good he was and his speed, and he ended up over a lap down. So that was one drive in particular that I identified. And as I said in the pre-season podcast, is considering what the Green Stripes has as potential, that they've really not used it. Gasper's DNF'd and Christoph was 13th. So it's that those two drives in particular stood out, where Steve and Christoph were so far down in cars that had a significant amount more development on them than especially the Torrents. And while we know the capabilities and the abilities of Petter and Jim, you'd still think someone of Steve's ability would give those two guys a run for their money in the Kerno, but it didn't really happen.
Yeah, perhaps Kerno are paying for choosing two drivers with no GPVWC experience. Now, granted, obviously they've got Wixie in charge and they've got Scott as a test driver, but at the end of the day, maybe experience is something that could be hurting the two race guys.
There is that potential, obviously, yeah, and it's a case of balancing the cost of what they've got as well. In terms of the drivers they've brought in, it's a lower cost because they're new, but it's whether you take that risk with two brand new drivers.
Okay, so that was Australia. We're going to move on to a quick look over the Malaysian Grand Prix at Sepang, which was just last week and was pretty fecking wet, to say the least. And I suppose, given how close the Australian Grand Prix weather was to what the real F1s that guys had on Sunday, I'm expecting a deluge on Sunday for the real Formula One. But anyway, on to our guys. We again had Dave Carson winning, and I think what it must be, in all the races he's probably taken part since he started that role in the Masters, I think he's not won 3 of them, I think, at this rate. I think anything he kind of is racing right now, he's got the golden touch, and it's amazing to think that you think that he's raced in the Super Cup towards the end of last year and he won that race. He's the Super League races he didn't win. He obviously had the incident with James Shepherd, which followed by him over pushing the car, trying to make up for that last time in Japan. And I think he just had a poor showing then in Singapore, but it wasn't down to a lack of pace. But he dominated the Winter GT. He won the first round of the World GT. He dominated the Masters. And he didn't race in the Race of Champions, where he probably would have won had he. I mean, it's amazing to think that he's so dominant on all levels right now. Will, what are your thoughts on the man with the golden touch right now?
Well, in all honesty, it's a relief. And I'll tell you why, because obviously the deal that we had for Dave to race in Ocean was something we announced pretty late in the season, after the end of the season, but it was something that was agreed earlier on, and a couple of races after we had sort of fleshed out and agreed on him driving for us were the two races, the two final races of the Super League season in which he retired. I was like, what, the Nursen curse had been hitting again, and I was like, oh god, whoever signed. But obviously, I was confident in the fact it was just a moment. I know Dave is an excellent driver, so I never any doubt that he would absolutely stellar job once it was in our car. But still, it was kind of interesting to see how he would get on in Australia and in Malaysia, because on back of two negative races in Super League, you never know whether you send new Paris.
Yes, and I'm sure it's probably conflicting feelings for you, Nick. I'm sure on one hand you're delighted for your friend, on the other hand you're probably thinking, yeah, imagine how much quicker he'd go in a midnight car.
It's a very strange one for me, actually, because like you said, I'm so pleased for Dave, but at the same time, you're beating my team at the same time. But I mean, I've raced with Dave for many, many years, and we seem to have fluctuated from season to season. One season, I seem to go quicker, then he goes quicker, then I go quicker, then he goes quicker, and he's on the crest of a wave of confidence at the moment, where he seems to be everything he touches, he pretty much wins in, which is incredible. So I think he's just since this RFE's been introduced, Dave has a very specific technique where it allows a lot of finesse and control with the car. And I think that's the luxury Dave then has, is when you start to suffer with, in particular, understeer in wet conditions. Dave doesn't really feel that as much, because the finesse ability and control that he has on the wheel, it's a very light and controlled wheel. And that's what I think was the proving point in Malaysia, especially. Obviously, Lee had no end of... Well, I shouldn't say any trouble, because he really didn't. He didn't really have any troubles on the track. He just had no pace in comparison to Dave. But when you compare the two drivers, as Will pointed out earlier on, is that Lee was very, very quick in the dry conditions. But as soon as the deluge of rain came down, well, dare I say, absolutely nowhere. He really was absolutely nowhere. And it goes to show that whatever the Norwegian has in terms of upgrades as well, is that Dave is able to balance that car enough that he just gets the maximum potential out of it. And I think the thing Dave is doing better than anyone else, including our team, including all teams throughout the field, is that he's maximising the tyres. He's getting the tyres into an operating window that are just absolutely spot on and working for him.
Yeah, I think the weather has been something that's really getting to that a lot of people have actually probably struggled with so far. I think we've touched on it in the past, but I don't think we've all gotten enough practice, maybe apart from Dave. As you said, his style seems to help him in that regard. But I know ourselves at Halcyon, I think, well, we both had shocking days, and obviously it was a great result for Adam that he ended up getting points on the day. But we just both were pretty much at sea with a car that just didn't want to drive in the wet, and it was, personally, I can just say it was one of the shittiest experiences I had. I think between the combination of the car and my own and the drive on the day, that when I banged the car up, there was very little motivation to try and continue. But it's something that we need to start getting on top of. I think as a whole, as a grid, that obviously the wet races are going to be here to stay. Now, obviously, we might not get as bad as the rest of the season, but who knows? But we need to be able to be adaptable and to be able to make up. I mean, these are the kind of the races where, especially the weather, that's going to throw up the cars that you might have an opportunity, especially for those, let's say, just below the top line of drivers and the midfield, that this is the opportunity for them to actually make a jump and actually get a great result. But looking at the results, obviously we had another great result for Ruud Heesterbeek, who was second. You wonder if he's going to go on and win the next one out with a third and a second. And Jim Paris got the first podium for Torrent. Now, obviously, they came with upgrades to the track, but obviously they're not quite up to the same level as the other top teams, but it was a massive result. And obviously with Petter in fifth, already a podium for the team in their second race. Will, obviously we know that Torrent are obviously a very professional outfit, but did you see them getting podiums this soon into the season?
I'll be honest with you, yes, because they're fielding two champions. They got the Formula Challenge and the Super Cup champions. We know both James and Petter's amazing talent, and they've got probably the best engines bought. Obviously, been Martex. No offense to. And they're very professional. You know that because of the ability of the drivers and the ability of the management structure of the team, you know that whatever performance is there in the car, whether it's a lot or a little, they will extract all of it. And especially in Malaysia, especially in the wet conditions that we had in Malaysia, that's where driver a bit more. I'm sure that in terms of dry pace, because of the state the car is, they probably would have lost out to some other drivers. But in wet conditions, the ability of the drivers were probably able to overcome some of the gap, and that's why you see them such a high position in third and fifth in the second.
But looking up the results, one person actually, even looking at the two race results, one person who kind of actually stands out, who's really had a good start to the season, is Lewis Redshaw for Hawkeye. Obviously, in 2011, he was very competitive in the Super Cup and was teammate to the eventual champion Bart de Vos. Last year, he didn't make a lot of sounds or anything like that when he was driving. Probably was overshadowed when he had James Shepherd as his teammate for the second half of the season. Actually, a lot of us had the opportunity to get to know Lewis a bit more now that he's on TeamSpeak quite a bit now during the race sessions and during the practice sessions. But, he recovered to 10th position after being involved with the accident with Lee Morris at the first corner at Australia. And here he was 7th. He was nearly pretty much best of the rest when you kind of think of when you remove the Midnight Torrents and Norgens from it. So it was a great result for Lewis. Nick, do you see him getting a podium maybe this year if the circumstances work out right for him?
Well, I thought actually his driving in Malaysia was particularly impressive because obviously being in the wet conditions, I thought he drove exceptionally well. I know towards the latter part of the race he was giving Alex a little bit of trouble, but Alex was able to just negotiate the car a little bit quicker and was able to pull a little bit away from Lewis. But he's improved a hell of a lot in the past year, especially, and I think Lewis is a guy that has tremendous potential and tremendous ability, and you may see possibly even one of the top teams snapping up for maybe next year, because he's starting to show the results. And we all say about potential, but he's actually starting to show the results now. And if the Hawkeye is being able to be developed at quite a solid rate, there's nothing to say that Lewis on one of his good days could end up on the podium even with that Hawkeye.
Yes, indeed, and he beat Bart de Vos. Obviously, Bart was in 11th, and obviously Bart is someone who was rather highly rated and is 2011 Super Cup champion. Looking up and down the results, a few kind of stood out as great results. Actually, again, someone who's actually done well over both races, I should point out, is Christoph Liechtenstein. I know you touched on the fact that probably Green Stripe Racing aren't extracting everything they should be out of the car, but Christoph's got 2 points finishes, which I think is a great result for the guy. I mean, I think he was someone that we kind of looked at and thought, I think I do recall myself even saying that maybe he probably should have looked for someone that would be quicker to extract more out of the car. But I'm eating a bit of humble pie here, and when he's got 2 points finishes and definitely two more points finishes than I have right now. What are your opinions on how Christoph has started the year, Bill?
Well, Green Stripes obviously come on the back of a very, very successful season. So if you compare it to last year, everything is going to be pointing. But I think, considering the quality of the position, to have Christian do so well, and to have Christian have a relatively small gap from a talented driver like David Gaspers, same kind of machinery, I think he's done an impressive job. I mean, the league nowadays is not the league that we had in be able to go and get points in races. It's just absolutely brilliant, and he's still a very young driver and still a developing driver. His learning curve is still, kind of steep, and he's still got a lot of work to do. But I think he's doing really, really.
And another team that's actually done rather well off the start, if we look at the two races, actually the Red Archer team, which has actually scored both cars, sorry, have been in the top 10 in they've been another team that have done very well off the start of the season over the two races has actually been Red Archer, and which have both cars in the top 10 for both races, and they were another team we kind of looked at and wondered whether they were going to slide backwards, given that they failed to take advantage of a great car over the last couple of years, and obviously there was some questions about their finances, but both Muscat and Junt have survived and haven't suffered from any kind of disconnections or anything like that, which both seem to be suffering from during the preseason, and gotten points on the board. So do you think they can keep this one going, Nick?
I think the drive in Malaysia, particularly from them, was particularly good. In difficult conditions, and a car that's not quite as developed as others, where they have usually developed quite quickly. I think they've actually done quite well, really. I think Red Archer have done, and I think this is my turn to be a bit of humble pie, because I thought they would be well back, but they've actually got themselves in two top 10 positions, as you say, which is very, very strong. And I think they will be able to build on that and take confidence from that, and it should allow them to push forwards in front of teams that I thought may have been in front of them. The Green Stripes, Woods, etc., Kerno, I thought they may have been in front of them, but those two drivers in particular, with Junt and Muscat, are doing an exceptional job after the first two races, and they're going about their job quite quietly as well. They're going about it quite quietly. There's no big fuss about it, because there's been a few times where Red Archer have piped up and said various things, but it seems that they just got their head down and got on with it, and reaping the benefits for the moment after the first two races.
And this is the time to when you got to start putting points on the board. I mean, there's a lot of people, as we've pointed out, that haven't put points on the board, and at the end of the season, these are the ones that could decide the minor places, and every little point counts. And talking about points, someone who actually scored his first Super League points, I believe, was Timu Taika. At least he got his first ones for Woods. So he missed Australia, but coming in, 2 points on the board for Timu, who's someone who was questioned rather extensively during the preseason podcast by Lee Morris, but 2 points on the board for Timu, which is an important one for Woods, given that the announcements have come this week that Tom Parker will be stepping out of the car for the foreseeable future until the middle of the summer. And we're still unsure at this point what exactly Woods' plans are for that their first seat now. Obviously, we might probably see Ben Warren in the car in the short term anyway, as their third driver to fill in. But it'll be interesting to see how Woods Racing are going to handle that seat until Tom Parker is available to come back. Not the most ideal situation for the team, given that they're trying to rebound. Right, Will?
Yeah, that was possibly the worst thing that could happen to the team. Obviously, we know Tom is a good driver. He's a driver that's been learning a lot and improving the last couple of seasons. Last year, he did a very, very solid job. And this was meant to be the year in which everything came together for him. And unfortunately, situation is such that he cannot go on, at least for a big blow for Woods. I'm confident, considering the level of talent that's available. Ollie will be able to find someone good to place him. My only concern is, in a sense, that Tom will be back, so anyone coming in will possibly looking at just coming in for a limited number of races, and that could perhaps not suit well drivers that are currently doing so well in the Cup. Ollie is a very experienced manager. He's very talented as a manager, and he's been fighting at the top end for many years, and I'm sure he's going to find someone step in on as long as it's needed.
But I suppose the question is there people actually out there? I mean, I know it's easy to say that there's talented guys out there, but I'm thinking a lot of those guys at the top end of the Super Cup aren't likely to want to give up potential, a run in the championship. And I suppose it's something I've kind of looked at myself as kind of thing is that a lot of the top guys are all kind of locked in, and they're probably locked in with teams that they're quite happy with. That actually finding someone quick enough to kind of come in and do a capable job in a Super League car isn't easy. I mean, I suppose Midnight or Nick are in a great position that you've actually got a good stocking of drivers down through the series that you've got some affiliation with. But for Woods, it's not going to be easy to fill the void left by Parker, even if it is only for a short time.
Well, on that front, yeah, we are very lucky that we do have an abundance of talents throughout the ranks within Midnight and PG as well. The fact of the drivers that we have to come up, obviously our test driver being James Shepherd, and if any of our drivers weren't able to race, obviously he gets straight up, and we all know how good he is. And it stems back down throughout the series then as well. So it's finding that sort of solid foundation and base to be able to work with to allow yourself to progress and move forwards, and identifying talent at certain times where you can bring them in at the right time and approach them at the right time. Woods have been, we all know how much Parker is improving and getting quicker, and we wish him all the best and look forward to him back very soon. But unfortunately, Woods don't have the depth of talent pool to dip into. And I know it sounds quite arrogant, but what we do in particular, we are very lucky in that sense. But if a deal is able to be, whether it's a reserve driver or if someone's drafted in on a temporary basis, Woods, to any driver that is listening, Woods are a first-rate, top-rate team. They're a great bunch of guys, and Ollie will make you welcome no ends. And it's just about understanding where the position we put into. Only a few races, whatever the case may be, you're walking into a team that's going to make you feel at home. So, depending if they actually promote from within with the drivers that have available to them, or they bring someone in, I still think Woods will find their feet and still be okay. It's just a question now of if the driver that gets promoted up is able to deliver the results enough for them to push on for the rest of the season.
You see, there's also the thing to keep into consideration that any reserve driver signing a reserve contract can be used for up to 4 races. Is that going to be enough to be back? But it's definitely something that would allow Super Cup Championship contender to both up to 4 races. Obviously, then he would have to one or the two continue. That could open possibility for some of the top drivers to sort of step in. And one other thing I'm considering is perhaps, and I just need to double check. Considering he's not a test driver for his own team, Matt Quick's coming back. We obviously know he's got a lot of links to competed for Woods for a very long time, and he's extremely successful driver for the team. He's won races with them, so perhaps he could step in for his old team and help them in this moment. We know he's a decent driver.
I think, Will, you actually broke up a bit there, so I actually didn't catch the name of the driver you were talking about.
Mark Wicks.
Oh, Wixie. Ah, right.
Yeah.
No. Yes, no,
Well,
that
you
would
know,
actually,
he's-
when you do think about it, yeah, Wixie, you wouldn't have automatically thought about him, thinking he's kind of gotten himself nice and quietly there in the Super Cup. That, yeah, I'd never really actually thought about Wixie.
You know, he struggled last year with the Super League mod, and we know he's a very very good driver, but he just didn't click with the car last year. But you also know his links with Woods, and you know that a driver like Wixie will come and deliver a consistent and solid performance. And perhaps at this time, and considering the situation they are, that's what Woods need. And you know the quality is not gonna go away. And if Wixie finds a car that he likes, he's gonna be competing for points. That's for sure.
Indeed. So remember, if we see Wixie in a Woods car again this season, you heard it here first. I'm going to finish up this podcast with one final bit on Sepang, going back to Nick. Again, same question to you as I did with Australia. Is anything that kind of looking at Malaysia that really stood out for you now as you look back on the results?
I think we already touched on with the fact of the Hawkeye and Lewis Redshaw. I think that was probably the most impressive turn of form, and then the Red Archers doing the job they did. For me, it was actually the two Hawkeye guys as well. I thought Bart did quite well as well. So the Red Archers and the Hawkeyes had the best of the rest drivers, if you like it, in Malaysia.
Indeed. So that's our 2-race review of the opening of the Super League season. We're just going to touch very quickly before we finish up, just on a general community note, and looking at everything we've had so far. Obviously, it's not just the Super League that we've had racing. We've also had the Super Cup. We've had Formula Challenge. The World GT's had its first round as well. And in the coming weeks, we're going to have the World Sports Series starting. So there's definitely a lot going on here at the GPVWC. Not just very fast Formula One looking cars going around tracks. Obviously, something that we discussed here before we started recording this podcast was just how global it seems the GPVWC has become now in recent years. Will, when we went from being I suppose the old days in the F1 VWC, and you kickstarted GPVWC again, and we went online in 2009, we were very, for lack of a better word, home nation oriented. You know, the majority of people were coming from England, and we obviously had a few Scots, the Welsh, and myself and Kieran representing the Emerald Isle here. But we've definitely seen over this season and last now, we've really expanded out in the world in terms of where we're getting our drivers.
Well, I mean, I couldn't have said it better. Obviously, when we switched online at first, it was just a matter of finding people that were able to take part at the times. We've always been competing during the week, which is very good in certain senses. But obviously, when you factor in time zones differences, easily a time in which people are at school or at work. So you obviously tend to close it to a certain geographical factor. That was the case. We had mostly a European league in the first couple of years. It's really nice to see it expanding and getting back to a global stage. We've got drivers from Canada, we've got Australians, and we're getting drivers from various other locations. I mean, just in the last Super League race in Malaysia, out of 26 drivers, we had 12 different nationalities. I think that's That's a really, really nice factor. You really add a new dimension to the league, and even though it can cause some problems, because obviously language barriers and different conceptions of humor and can cause a few problems at first, but I think in the long run the league definitely gains from it. So it's a welcome development in my opinion.
Indeed, it's probably something we want to touch on in future podcasts after we, because obviously, like you said, it's got some benefits, but there's also some things we need to watch out for with, and to make sure that we welcome people with open arms, and we try to sit back and think, well, what if this person doesn't have English as a first language, and what can we do to help them? You know, we've grown exponentially now over the last 12 months, and with that, there are growing pains, and I think some people are farther ahead than others, and sometimes we have to remember maybe a community is only as good as its slowest driver and its weakest members. So obviously, to move forward properly, we need to ensure that we all move forward together in one big step rather than some running while others are just walking. But anyway, we're going to finish it up with this for this edition of the podcast. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll be hopefully back for our fourth edition rather soon as the season starts to progress more. We hope to at least have 2 a month. Obviously, we want to try and keep the discussions on the race as current as possible, and with that in mind, we hope to have one after every second race so we can keep you guys up to date on what we think is going on in the. And we'll be hopefully planning to branch out into some of the other series. I know a lot of you are being asking me about whether we'll be looking more at Super Cup, Formula Challenge, and the other series. That is the plan. Once we find some time in our rather busy schedules, I know I need to kind of sort out time to drive, amongst other things, which is, I suppose, has taken rather a backseat this season, and it's hopefully something that we're going to get worked out, and we'll get these things pumped out with some more regularness for you people. But anyway, I'd like to thank Nick and Will for joining me tonight. I know it's a bit short notice given how things worked over the weekend. So thanks, gents, for joining me tonight, and I hope to be talking to you guys soon. So good evening, guys, and happy racing.